Who is this guy?
Okay, this is Jim DiEUGENIO. He's the author of many books. One of my favorites is this new one here, which is called JFK Revisited, which is the book of the docu-series called Destiny Betrayed.
The 4-hour one,
The 4-hour
and the 2-hour version.
And the 2-hour version, which is JFK Revisited, which was on Showtime, but I highly recommend the 4-hour, which is on Shout DVD.
Yes,
And
and you can stream it off Amazon.
You can stream it off Amazon, which is in 4 one-hour segments, fairly inexpensive at about $2.99 per segment, which is what I really recommend. I bought the Blu-ray because I'm a psycho and I wanted to hear Jim do the director's commentary with Oliver Stone, which is worth the price of admission.
Thank you so much.
For people who are really into this stuff. That's the best part of the Blu-ray is the commentary track, which is what I bought it for. Jim is also the author of Reclaiming Parkland. He's got 2.
No, it's called that's been retitled. It's called JFK Assassination: The Evidence Today.
Okay.
All right.
I stand corrected. Also the author of
Destiny Betrayed.
2 versions of Destiny Betrayed.
Don't get the first version.
Okay, get the second.
Get the
I have them
second
both.
version.
I got the second and the first.
Well, that shows you who he is.
That's who I am. I have them both. I also have Probe magazine. I also have the book, The Assassination.
That's the Assassinations.
Okay, just to explain to the audience.
Yeah, that's an anthology. Probe magazine on JFK, MLK, RFK, and Malcolm X.
Right.
I think that's the only book you'll find that
All
covers
3.
all 4 assassinations.
All 4, right.
Of the 60s.
Right.
Okay.
And
And
that's
that was
the
an anthology of the best that we did for Probe ran for about 7 years.
Right.
And that's an anthology of the best that we ever did from that magazine.
Right. Okay. So you have the Assassinations, the book, which spins off of Probe.
Right.
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 Also the Parkland, which is now
JFK Assassination: The Evidence Today.
Right.
And by the way, the reason that book was retitled, Oliver goes up to Skyhorse, and they were doing the Putin interviews, the book of the Putin interviews,
Right.
and he calls me up from the office. Okay, he goes, Jim, why would you title your book after a movie that nobody saw? Okay. I go, well, Oliver, nobody knew it was going to be a bomb.
You're talking about Parkland.
Yeah.
The movie.
The movie, yeah.
Right. Well, let's just talk about that for a second.
And he goes, we're going to put a new title on this thing.
Really? What does it have to do with him?
That's what I said.
Right. What's it to you?
We're going to put a new title on this
What?
thing. Me and Tony are thinking about...
Him and Tony?
Yeah, the guy who runs Skyhorse.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to put a new title. So you're going to have to redraft a couple of chapters.
What?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's what he did. And
I'm
so
afraid
that's
to call.
how it
I'm
came
afraid to call him about this now. Jesus Christ.
So that's how the book got retitled. Okay. Oliver Stone special.
Let me tell you something. When you get notes from Oliver on scripts, I mean, he can be very harsh. Let me just put it that way.
Well, I know what harsh means because he said this boring ass script.
No. Let me just tell you. I also wrote a miniseries of LBJ, and it's similar to the Oswald one. I didn't write all 5 because I'm not crazy anymore. I wrote the first 2 hours, and I gave it to him. He said, "This is the worst piece of shit I've ever read in my fucking life." He goes, "I can't believe it's the same author." He goes, "You didn't," and I'm going, "What?" And there's nothing wrong with it. It's the same style, the same guy. I wrote it. His love affair with LBJ, and we were talking about this when he did a recent interview with Ben Patrick.
Patrick Bet-David, who Jim is going to be on Tuesday.
Okay, he was on.
Oliver had him on, yeah.
Right, or the reverse, right?
Right.
He was on their show. We went to Florida, I guess. He was down there. So they started to really grill him. They knew the assassination inside and out. And Oliver kind of backs himself into a corner saying, the leading suspect might indeed be LBJ. He says, "I can't believe I'm saying this." And it was
Oliver
a
said that?
great, yes,
was
it's one of the
convincing
best
them.
moments of, you got to see this. He kind of like,
Brilliant.
brilliant how they kind of backed him into this, and he kind of admits that. But
Yes.
anyway, he has a sore spot or a love affair with LBJ that I wasn't able to get around by showing the warts of LBJ in this miniseries, which he didn't like. But the Oswald one we did like, and the Oswald one is what we're trying to, do the thing with Macmillan now with the book. But anyway, I just wanted to give the people at home the stuff that you've done before. Just a side note on Parkland, the movie, directed by Peter Landsman. I don't know if you know who Peter Landsman is.
New York Times guy.
No, more than a New York Times guy. Operation Mockingbird, a spook related. There's two CIA consultants working on Parkland who are in the credits. If you can suss them out, they're in there. So Parkland had a different message than just being a film. He also wrote Kill the Messenger. And
He actually did a nice job on it.
No. They always do a nice job. As I've said to others, when they did Animal Farm from England, the animation, the Orwell animation, they did a wonderful job. Because why would they make shit product without money? They do a great job. And they also did the Mark Felt with Liam Neeson. He also did that, another propaganda.
Which is pretty terrible.
Exactly, but look, when you're working with the spooks, you got to put out product.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just get into Assassination, because I have a couple of questions for you, which
Sure.
have haunted me for years, and maybe you, maybe not. Throat wound is an entrance wound.
According to Malcolm Perry on the first day, that's what it was.
Right, now what's your opinion? Because that's my opinion too, I'm just trying to, what do you think?
All right. I believe you have to take the first day, what happened there. And he had the best view, okay? And I think you have to take that seriously. All right, the question is, if it's an entrance wound, where did it go?
That's my next question.
Okay.
And where did it come
What
from?
happened
Where
to
did
the
it come
bullet?
from? And that was my
Okay.
next question, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
what happened to the bullet?
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
now, I think we know what somebody like David Lifton would say, he'd say,
Yeah.
well, they took it out,
Right.
something like that.
Right, replaced his entire thorax.
so that becomes, I agree that becomes a little problematic, but I don't know a way out of that.
Neither do I.
Unless you're gonna go for the whole body alteration.
No, I'm not. But I'm just
right.
saying it doesn't traverse. It comes from somewhere, from the front. If you play it out, we were walking through on the extreme right-hand side of the overpass the other day, and it lines up perfectly with a throat shot. And that building is a federal building which had government agencies in it. The building on the other side, post office inspectors are in there, FBI, CIA, on that postal building, by the way. The parking lot is over there. But if you take that throat shot, which doesn't traverse, I don't know why these shots don't traverse, but let's take the back right shoulder shot, right? Also doesn't traverse.
No, according to the best evidence, that doesn't go through.
Why doesn't?
Okay,
why
because-
don't both these shots go through?
Well, first of all, let me advance the evidence for that.
Okay.
That night, they did put what they call a malleable probe into the back wound. All right. By all the credible evidence, it did not go through the body. So I believe that's kind of credible. Okay. That
Right,
kind
but
of
also
evidence
probed it,
is kind
and
of
it was
credible.
literally the length of a finger. I mean, you're talking about an inch
Yes,
in
yeah,
depth.
it didn't go through very far.
Right.
Okay, all right, so that also becomes problematic, all right? Now, there is evidence that there was a bullet that did drop out. They called it a missile.
Yeah.
All right, but then people have argued, no, it wasn't really a missile, it was really more like and so the story gets changed as time goes by, but then in the film, JFK Destiny Betrayed, Randy Robertson, who's a radiologist, found pretty good evidence that there was a bullet, a fourth bullet, that was found in the car that night, okay? And because James Young, who was Berkeley's assistant,
This
all
is
right.
Admiral Berkeley,
Admiral George Berkeley,
the
Kennedy's
doctor,
personal physician.
who signed the death certificate
Right.
eventually.
He told Young to send somebody out to recover anything that was still left in the car. And so Young sent two of his assistants out, and they came back with a bent bullet. All right. Now, what makes this story credible is that Young never talked about it
Right.
for years on end. And then out of the blue, he mentions it in a military interview because he's a Navy guy, okay? Jan Herman was a naval historian, okay? And then he wrote a letter to, of all people, Gerald Ford, Okay, and he asked him, "Did you have any evidence that there was a fourth bullet that was in the youth?" And you know what Gerald Ford said?
Right.
Well, I refer you to the books by David Bellin and Gerald Posner. Okay.
Right.
So then he wrote Spectre. And Spectre was actually interested.
This is Arlen Specter, later
Yeah,
to be
of
Senator
course.
of Pennsylvania.
He was actually interested, okay, in the story. But for some reason, they never got together. Young and him never got together. So in the long version of the film, all right, there is evidence that there was a fourth bullet. Where it came from, we don't know. Well, you know, I don't have to tell you.
Right.
The autopsy was just an utter disaster. Okay.
Well, I mean, they had one of the great takeaways of the film, for me personally, was the fact that Curtis LeMay was at the autopsy.
Yeah,
That's a
very
little
interesting
precious
story.
gem. That's a gem.
And by the way, it's not just that, but Doug Horn interviewed a guy who did a schedule thing for LeMay. LeMay, number one, lied about where he was that day.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. This is General Curtis bombs away LeMay.
Secondly, he disobeyed orders and did not come in at the airport he was supposed to be at, which was Andrews. He was supposed to land at Andrews. He landed at National. I believe he did that for two reasons. That first of all, he didn't want any cameras to pick him up because all the cameras were at Andrews Air Force Base, because that's where Jackie Kennedy came in. And secondly, National's closer to Bethesda. Okay. And then we have O'Connor, who, at the request of James Humes, he was told, get that guy in the third row in the gallery, tell him to put that cigar out, it's producing all this smoke. And so O'Connor walks over and he sees that it's LeMay. LeMay takes his cigar out, blows the smoke in his face. and O'Connor comes back to Humes and says, I can't tell him to take, that's General Curtis LeMay. Okay, all right. So what on earth was he doing?
That's my question to you. I mean, it sounds like a celebratory cigar.
You know?
It seems more celebratory than any other aside.
Now, let me add something that's not in the book and not in the film.
Okay.
I just discovered later. Later that evening, Malcolm Perry's at his house.
This is Dr. Malcolm Perry.
Yeah,
who
the
was in
guy who
Parkland,
did the tracheotomy.
Did the tracheotomy.
And did
for
the
those.
press conference that said it was an entrance wound.
Right, who's later flipped.
Yeah, well, we can get to that later.
Right, okay.
And so what happens is that he gets a phone call from Bethesda. And it's the autopsy doctor, Humes, okay, and Boswell.
Right.
And they're asking him to change his story, all right, that it was not an anterior entrance wound in the neck, all right? And this got very heated.
Wow.
All right, and they threatened to take him before a licensing board and take his medical license away.
Sounds familiar
All right,
today.
And so he said, I just couldn't do it, at least not at that time. He did later, okay, but he wasn't going to do it that. But that shows that there's another story that goes along with that. At the end of the press conference, when Perry was leaving, a guy in a suit grabbed him by the arm and said, don't ever say that again.
Right.
All right? So if you now remember, this is like 2:15. This
Right.
is like
Friday
90
afternoon.
minutes
Yeah.
after the assassination.
This is Friday afternoon, November 22nd.
And so they knew.
Yeah.
They knew
Yeah,
the
yeah.
cover story. Within 90 minutes
About
of the
wounds,
assassination.
just about wounds.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk
All
about
right.
ballistic stories.
And then that night, he gets the phone call that night. This is what I mean. I've always believed that in this case, that the cover-up was planned with the conspiracy, okay? So they knew how to snap it on very quickly, during the day.
If I could just interject something, which I agree exactly what you're saying, because you're talking the truth. Why is an LBJ a co-conspirator then? If the cover-up is linked to the...
He asked Hoover, didn't he? Were they shooting at me?
Well, that's because he knows they're being recorded. I mean, but they immediately get rid of the tape, obviously, as soon as it goes up to Larry Sabato in Virginia, the tape disappears, the audio tape.
There's a conversation of 14 and a half minutes
That's right.
that you have the transcript, but you don't have the tape.
Right, but
Okay.
I remember the tape. That tape disappears when it goes to the university.
You heard the tape?
I've heard the tape, and others have heard the tape.
What did it say?
Exactly what the transcript says.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Right, no,
All
it's
right,
exactly the same, but the audio disappears
Mm-hmm.
when it goes to the University of Virginia when Larry Sabato starts the presidential library. That's where it disappears, Jimmy.
Are you implying that Larry?
I am not only implying, I am saying it on the public record.
Okay, all right.
Just to
fine.
get on the record, because we were tracking it for years.
Okay.
It goes there, and all of a sudden the audio.
That's very interesting. It's something I didn't know.
Okay, so let's move back to the bullets, because I'm interested in bullets right now.
All right.
We have the thing coming out of the back. Let's just briefly, for those at home, explain how that back right wound is reconstructed in the Warren Commission report to be the wound that Gerald Ford moves it to the back of the neck and says, "I did it for the good of the American people," thereby admitting.
No, he did it for clarity, he said.
For clarity, thereby admitting that he single-handedly altered this document and the Warren report on purpose, untruthfully, for clarity.
Yes.
Okay.
How could it be for clarity?
Whatever his reason is,
All right,
you can
okay.
see the
We
pencil.
really do live in 1984.
Right.
Yeah, words mean the opposite of what they're supposed to mean. All right. All right. Now, as he just said, the review board discovered that Gerald Ford altered the location of the rear wound into Kennedy's back, and he raised it up into the neck area. This was not discovered until, let's see, 33 years
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
it happened, because J. Lee Rankin's son, J. Lee Rankin was the chief counsel of the Warren Commission, had the draft, okay, in Rankin's archives, in which Ford crossed it out and rewrote it. All right. Now, I don't have to tell you why that's important, because it's sort of, what prosecutors, the hot phrase is consciousness of guilt. Okay, when you do something like that, and you're not a doctor, and you're not a criminalist,
yeah.
okay, and you're none of those things, but you actually just, with the stroke of a pen, you change history. All right, that's
Then become president.
right. That's pretty bad. All right, and obviously he felt like the general public would not accept it, where the true location was. And since they were not going to publish any autopsy materials, okay, in the Warren Commission volume, very, very few, all right, then it would be very, very hard to detect. All right, and as Alan Dulles said, go ahead, publish it. People don't read anymore.
They don't read anymore,
Unfortunately for them, some people still did read. Okay, and they said this is kind of hard to believe that this bullet comes in, okay, and it somehow goes up in trajectory, and then when it's still rising up, it somehow goes down, okay, to get into Conley's thing. All right, and Cyril Wecht had a really, he testified before the House Select Committee, and he said very eloquently, you have this bullet coming in from the 6th floor, okay, at a downward trajectory. It hits Kennedy in the back, headed downward, and somehow in his body, it deflects upward, all right, and then comes out of his neck at an upward angle, all right? And then it flattens its trajectory within a matter of just a few feet, okay? And it goes into Conley's back. And that, of course, as he always used to say, is, I think it was Mark Lane who originated the phrase, the magic bullet.
Yeah.
Okay, and by the way, I haven't even gone through the whole thing, but it's
Right.
hard enough to believe, which is that. And Jerry Ford tried, obviously, to conceal this. Okay, but in the film, as you know, because we had the article written by the former premier of France, D'Estaing. You know, he had a conversation with Ford, and Ford admitted to him, Valerie D'Estaing, that, yeah, we knew it was some kind of an organization that pulled this thing off, but we just couldn't locate which one it really was. All right.
It's probably the most honest thing he ever said.
Yeah. Obviously, he never thought it was going to become public.
Right.
Okay. You know, so in the film, we have Boggs, Cooper, and Russell.
These are three Warren
dissenting
commissioners.
from the commission.
Dissenting
but
from
if you
the
count Ford, that's really four.
Right.
That's four people. So the minority report was a majority report, but they all thought it was negative. All right.
Well, Russell says on audio tape to LBJ that I can't sign this.
He didn't want to sign it,
He didn't
right?
want to sign it, right?
Okay.
Right.
But he thought that his objections got onto the record.
Oh,
Okay,
right,
yeah.
right.
All
But they
right.
were deleted.
And well, it's even worse than that. He's sitting there. He's loaded for bear. He comes in with the Zapruder Films frames and Connolly's testimony, etc. And he thinks this is all going to be on the record. And because there's a girl there who has apparently a stenography machine, right? And so he's gets everything in, and then what happens is Harold Weisberg comes along and discovers that no, there was no transcript of that meeting.
Right.
And he tells Russell, I believe it was in like '69 or something, all right? And Russell says, what? And he's really angry, okay? And so he sends his assistant over to the National Archives. Is this really true? And he comes back and says, yeah, it's really true. You got 6 pages of a 4-hour meeting. Okay?
Wow.
And so that provoked Russell to become the first Warren Commissioner who went on the record criticizing what they had done. Now, there's a second part to that story that never gets told. They went down I call these guys the Southern Wing. Boggs,
right.
Cooper,
Yep.
and Russell.
Yep.
All right. They wanted to examine Marina Oswald. And I think it's in Volume 5 of the Warren Commission. Their interrogation of Marina Oswald is completely different than her interrogations under the Warren and Dulles and McCloy, because they wanted her to be their chief witness. It's pretty obvious when these three guys are examining Marina, they don't believe anything she's saying, okay? They're very negative about her. They're trying to figure out, how the heck did you get out of Russia?
That's a great question.
Okay,
Yeah.
All right, and they don't even believe that she can't understand English.
Right.
All right, they don't believe that either. Okay, and so
Well, her English does change over
it gets radically better.
Better, yeah. My
And
Russian's
so-
terrible.
And so after that interrogation, which by the way, the Dulles, McCloy, and Ford, who I call the Troika, because they were really the leaders, okay, they're not there. Warren's not there. It's just Rankin and those three guys. And so see this, what I'm saying right now, this foreshadows what's going to happen at the last meeting. Because obviously Rankin figured these guys are going to be a problem, okay? And so that he tells the rest of the guys, we can't have that recorded, okay,
Right.
what Russell's going to say. After the meeting, they went down to Dealey Plaza. Russell took an unloaded rifle up to the 6th floor,
Oh,
okay?
yeah.
And he tries to, and he comes back down with a smile on his face, says, oh yeah, that was an easy shot. Now, I don't see how it gets any better than Carlos Hathcock. Okay.
Tell us about
Carlos Hathcock was the greatest sniper of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
All right. He had 98 kills, certified kills. He had 200 uncertified. All right. And Craig Roberts was writing a book about the assassination, and he knew Hathcock because Roberts was a sniper too.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I have that book. Yeah.
So he calls up Carlos Hathcock and he says, what do you think of this whole Warren Commission thing? There's 3 shots in 6 seconds with 2 direct hits, all right? And Carlos Hathcock had retired. He now ran a SWAT team training center in Virginia with a whole obstacle course and everything. And so Carlos says, Craig, I can't tell you how many times we tried it. And we lined up everything perfectly.
Interesting.
Okay, we had the whole sixth floor.
Right.
We had the distance. We had the speed. Okay, we had the angle and everything. Couldn't do it.
Right.
We couldn't do it. All right. Now, if that guy couldn't do
Right.
it, you're going to tell me Oswald, okay, who was a joke on the firing range, he could do it?
Right.
You know, I've always said the Carlos Hathcock story, to me, that's it.
That's it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I don't even want to talk about anything
Right.
else.
Well,
All right?
I love the great different configurations of the sniper's nest itself. If you look at,
Oh, yeah,
you know,
that's very interesting.
Isn't that? I mean,
Yeah.
you see the different. There are
Yeah.
attempts to create this
Right.
thing out of Bonnie Ray Williams' kitchen.
Yes.
Which is what to
Right.
people at home. Bonnie Ray Williams was the African American worker who ate the chicken sandwich, the
Right.
Dr. Pepper, and the menthol cigarettes. Waiting
Right.
for his president to show up.
Right.
But if you read the Warren Commission, how long they talked to him about the chicken sandwich with the bones, Jim.
Yes.
That's hysterical.
Yeah, it
Right.
is. It
The
is.
guy they're trying to move back, for people at home, they're trying to move back in the timeline.
Yes.
Of when Bonnie Ray Williams goes downstairs to the
Yes.
5th floor to give
But Bonnie Ray Williams kind of stood his ground.
Yes,
Okay.
he does stand his ground.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You know, and so they were stuck. They were stuck with Bonnie Ray Williams saying that I was there till about 12:24,
Yeah.
12:25.
Yeah.
And they say, wasn't it a little? No. it's
No,
about-
he doesn't
It
buckle.
was about 12:24.
No, I ate the whole
And
sandwich.
so we're supposed to believe that Oswald somehow knew that he was going to be gone.
He's
right?
waiting
That-
behind
he's
the boxes.
waiting- he's
Listen,
waiting
Bonnie,
behind the door
can you
or
finish that
something.
chicken sandwich already? I got a shooting
Okay.
to do.
All right, and so look, I gotta move all these boxes and
Yeah,
everything,
yeah.
and I
It's a nightmare.
gotta okay, and I gotta put this
Well,
rifle
I mean,
together.
Jimmy, even Walter Cronkite that night says, and the sniper ate lunch while he waited for the president to show, and they got rid of that.
Yeah.
That was after 2 nights of German Mauser by Cronkite, right? Until it
And so they were left with this very improbable scenario of Oswald being able to somehow arrange this sniper's nest at this window with these big boxes that weighed like 35 pounds and arranging this in such a way that it would suggest that Oswald was waiting there with these boxes with a rifle and with this barrier behind him so nobody could see it.
Right.
But as he mentioned, Alan Eaglesham, with the help of Tom Allier, said that when Allier, he was the first civilian photographer on the 6th floor, those boxes weren't like that.
That's right. Well, he has, Allier, I think it's his photos that show
Yes.
the different configurations of the
Right,
boxes.
right.
I mean, they're attempting to construct the sniper's
Yes,
nest. I mean,
yes.
nobody could dispute that any
Right,
longer.
right. Alan Eaglesham used to have this wonderful website, okay, in which
By the way, Kennedy and King is your website?
kennedysandking.com.
Right, just to people at home, great website with a lot of great information. I
Thank
just
you.
want to get that out there. Go
All
on.
right, thanks for the commercial.
Sure.
All right, so Alan
We'll be
Eaglesham-
back in a moment, folks.
Alan Eaglesham had this wonderful website in which Tom Allier gave him the photographs, and it's right there. I mean, you can see how it changed over time.
Right.
All right, and the obviously the Dallas police, whether by hook or crook, whether by design or accident, put this configuration together. All right, it wasn't Oswald. Okay, it wasn't Oswald.
Right.
Now, but what he brings up, the thing about the way the commission tried to spin all this testimony, you know, I mean, that's very, very true. And it would never, you know, this is always one of the things that so perturbs me, is that these are a bunch of lawyers. These are lawyers. They know that what they're doing would never be fly in a courtroom, okay? But they did it anyway. And it's simply because we have a system we call the adversary system, all right? And you have a defense, and you have a prosecution, and you have a judge, okay? And the defense is there to make objections if they think the prosecutor has gone overboard. And the judge is supposed to make a ruling. Well, this was a runaway prosecution.
Right.
There was nobody there.
Well, that's why they denied
Right.
Mark Lane's ability to be the lawyer
Mark
for...
Lane wrote a letter to Rankin.
Right.
okay, and he said, I would like to represent
Marguerite
Oswald's interests
Right, his
in
mother
absentia.
specifically.
And you know what, Rankin's letter, I think it's in the Warren Commission, okay? He says, well, words of the effect, we're going to have too many secret documents that the FBI does not want to go public, so we're not going to be able to abide by your request. All right, so in other words, the fact that J. Edgar Hoover knew that his case was full of shit, okay, didn't want that made public.
Well, again, the deleted segment that we were talking about with LBJ is about the information coming out of Mexico City.
Right.
With
yes.
the phony Oswald and the phony audio.
And Hoover knew
Right.
that this was. Now, let me give you some background on this, so since he brought it up. Oswald was supposed to have gone to Mexico City in late September, early October. And he was supposed to have gone to the Cuban embassy and the Soviet embassy down there. All right. And then he was supposed to have returned. He came down on a bus and he rode up on a bus. He comes back about October 2nd or 3rd. All right. And the problem that we've had with this story, well, first of all, the Warren
multiple
Commission
problems.
swallowed it whole. Okay, they swallowed it whole. But within a couple of days, Hoover's on the phone with Johnson saying, you know, this is kind of funny because my agents have heard this tape that the CIA says is Oswald. And they're interviewing Oswald. And they say the guy on the tape is not the guy they're talking to.
And also the photos.
It's a different
And the
voice.
photos.
And then the other problem we have is they've sent up this photograph, okay? And this guy doesn't look anything like Oswald. So you're left with this very serious problem. Well, there's actually two problems.
There's three problems.
Number one,
Yeah.
did Oswald go to Mexico
I
City?
never bought into it.
And if
I never
why
bought into it.
can't they have a tape of it, and why don't they have a picture? And the other question is, did Hoover and Johnson believe this story coming out of the CIA about Oswald being there when they had evidence that said he wasn't there?
Right.
So that becomes a very serious problem. And later on, now I can't speak about Johnson, but Hoover, 6 weeks later, wrote a famous notation on a memo, and he said, words of the effect, let's not trust the CIA. You know that snow job they tried to give us about Oswald in
Right.
Mexico City.
Right.
All right, so this is 6 weeks later, okay, he writes this memo. Now, let me ask you this. If Hoover himself did not believe that Oswald was in Mexico City,
Right.
and he himself says that the CIA gave him a snow job, why is he going along with this story?
Well,
You know?
why would anybody go along with the Oswald in Mexico City story after that?
Right.
Because he's been
at that point in time,
Right.
the FBI obviously didn't believe
Right.
that Oswald was in Mexico
Well,
City.
he's trying to get his unemployment transferred to Austin. He's in the DMV. He's
Right.
cited here in Austin.
He's also at Odio's apartment.
He's in Odo's apartment, and he's also trying to meet with Connolly to get his discharge changed.
Right.
So there are witnesses in 301 FBI files, statements.
302s.
302s, I'm sorry,
Right, yeah.
that he was here.
Yeah, you could place him elsewhere.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So this becomes a very, very serious problem.
It's a very serious
that gets
problem.
worse and worse and worse and then when the Lopez report finally came
Right,
out.
right.
Now let me preface that in case.
Let me just explain who Lopez is for the
All right.
audience.
Eddie Lopez,
Lopez.
and Dan Hardway were the two authors of a 400-page report about Oswald in Mexico City for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. The reason that it was never declassified until
Recently.
about 16 years
Yeah,
later,
yeah.
all right, was that Eddie told me that, Jim, when we met with the CIA about the report, because they had last pass over what went into the volumes, okay? When we met with the CIA to go over the report, it took us 5 hours to get through the first 2 pages. They objected to everything.
Everything.
Okay,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
after the first day, Blakey threw in the towel, okay, that he wasn't going to spend 6 months trying to get the Lopez report declassified. So this is why it's not in the volumes. But when it finally did come out, there was a whole series of questions. In fact, the first 15 pages of the Lopez report deal with the camera outside the Cuban embassy. It described, because that camera was so high tech you wouldn't understand the way it worked. It was what they called a pulse camera.
Right.
When the air pressure changed outside of the door, the
triggered-
camera would be
triggered-
activated.
Right, triggered the camera.
And they explain this technology because what they're trying to say is, you got a camera like this, you don't have a goddamn picture of Oswald?
Right.
Are you serious? Come on. You know? All right. And then the David Phillips cover-up story was a camera was broken that
This is
day.
David
but
Atlee
it
Phillips,
wasn't. It wasn't. They found, if you can believe it, they found the work reports that said, no, the camera was in operation
Right,
that day.
right.
All right. In fact, there were 3 cameras.
There was one across the street. I mean,
Right,
yeah.
in operation.
In
that day.
operation.
So how the hell did they not get a picture of Oswald?
Also, there's a documentation.
Because here's the capper. He was there 5 times. So there should be 10 pictures of Oswald going in or out. There isn't one.
Not one.
So how can that possibly be? You know, and so this is what I mean about once the years go on, and saying this is another serious problem. The whole thing about delay and about censorship, see, if these problems would have been made aware of at the time,
They would have been
th-
shredded.
you would have created a real furor
Yeah.
in
Oh,
the
yeah.
public.
Yeah, yeah.
But the fact that they get delayed, and for example, the Lopez report doesn't come out till 32 years later,
Right.
okay, who cares? Yeah, it's just like people like us, that's all.
Right.
You know?
Well, that's
It's-
what they were talking about here last night about, Biden now has it on his desk to release what's remaining in the
Yes.
in the archives.
Right.
He'll pass it on, I'm sure. But
So this becomes a very, very serious, Oswald in Mexico City
it's a
becomes
big deal.
very, very
It's
serious problem.
It's always been a big deal to me.
All right?
I'm obsessed
and
with
so
it.
the question
Don't
then
forget
becomes...
the torture of the receptionist that we ordered.
Yeah,
Duran.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, this poor little girl who
Sylvia
they tortured.
Duran.
Sylvia Duran.
So Sylvia, because the reason that they did this, they essentially silenced her
Yeah.
forcibly.
Yeah.
Okay, was that when it came out later, years later, when she testified before the House Select Committee, Eddie Eddie Lopez told me this story because we're interviewing Duran, right?
This is Sylvia Duran, the receptionist at the Cuban
Who actually
embassy.
had the most interaction with Oswald.
That's right, or the supposed Oswald.
Yes, okay. And so Eddie says, Sylvia, how tall was the man that you talked to? And she points to Gary Cornwell, okay, who's the deputy counsel. Can you have him stand up?
Interesting.
And he stands up. He goes, it was about that tall. Gary Cornwell's like 5'5".
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And she goes, that's how tall he was.
There you go.
Yes. Well, Oswald was 5'9", 5'9" and a half.
Well, it's worse than
Okay,
that.
right.
They allege that she slept with him too.
And well, I think that's a bunch of bullshit. But,
Well, the whole thing is bullshit.
The other problem is that he had blonde hair. Okay, Oswald did not have blonde hair. Okay, so once she gets in the record, then the whole thing becomes, well, then obviously somebody was impersonating him. Okay, so why? For what reason?
When was
he being
this, Jim?
impersonated?
When was this?
This was late September.
Okay, when was the assassination?
Okay, 7 weeks later.
Okay, so obviously the frame is beginning in September.
Yeah, well, I think it was before. I think
No,
it was
no,
in
no,
New
but I'm saying the
Orleans.
first smoking gun
Yeah.
evidence of the frame
Right.
involving David Atlee Phillips out of Mexico City
Right.
begins in September. The
Right.
first smoking gun.
Right.
Okay.
And let me tell you this story that I just told him, which is when I first met Eddie Lopez, I drove up to his house in Rochester, New York.
He lives in Rochester, New York?
Yeah, he was a lawyer up there, and so I had what was then at that time the latest version of the Lopez report, and I had just read it. Okay, and I didn't know who Ann Goodpasture was.
Huh.
All right, and so I drive up to his house, and we're sitting in his basement eating sandwiches as I'm interviewing him, and I'm sitting here, he's sitting there, and I go, Eddie, who was Ann Goodpasture? And Eddie says she was a lying, conniving bitch. And if there was any justice in this screwed up world, she would be in jail today.
Wow.
And I said, but Eddie, who was she?
Right.
And he said, look, Phillips was almost never there because he was always flying up to Jamway or Langley.
Yeah.
And so when he wasn't there, she would take care of his operations. All right?
She was second in command of Mexico
Like,
City.
give you an example.
Okay.
She was the one who got the take from the Russian and the Cuban embassies every day.
Right.
All right? And then had them do the Tarasovs who would do the transcripts. And she lied about this.
That's right.
And it's right in the Lopez report.
Yes.
Okay? Because she sent them on a wild goose chase.
Yep.
All right, as to who actually got the first take. And then after they interviewed about the fourth guy, he says, well, wait a minute. Ann Goodpasture was in charge of that. And so they got this in the report, you know, how they had to go to 4 people. And so it turns out that Ann Goodpasture herself was a person. And see, obviously, what she was trying to conceal is that she would have been the first person to know that there was no picture and the voice was wrong. Okay? And
Well, when you say wrong, I mean, like they made a mistake or?
Well, somebody was there.
Right.
Okay.
So, you think
But it wasn't
it's a
Oswald.
random person, Jimmy?
Okay.
Or?
So she would have been the first person to probably know this. Okay. And so she obviously didn't want to confront that question because she was actually the person who sent the mystery man photo up. Okay. Maybe we can insert that in here.
Well, I sent you the
evidence.
photo last
Okay.
week of the guy, which we'll
Yeah,
insert
because
it.
the mystery man photo, this guy looks like about 6'1", about 220.
Somehow I went to high school with Mac Wallace. Apparently, from what I'm
And
understanding.
he's like a rugby player.
Yeah, he's huge.
Okay, he doesn't
He's
look
huge.
like Oswald at all.
Right.
Okay, and then in the Lopez report, it gets even
I think
better.
his name was Geb.
It gets even better. They figured out who he was.
Mm-hmm.
And they figured there's no way in the world that they could have mistaken this guy for Oswald. He was a Russian diplomat undercover. All right? Now, okay, and so this is what gets her in so many problems.
And good.
Okay, is that she was covering up for whatever was going on. And whatever was going on was obviously a deception. All right? That was probably planned in advance. All right?
Well, look what you have to do with the bus trips alone. I mean,
Wow.
all the crazy, the tickets, and who's
my
online,
God.
and who's sitting with them on the bus, Jimmy.
Right. And what passport did
What
Oswald
passport?
have?
I mean, it's
Were the
true.
2 Australian girls on the bus?
I
or were
love
they on
the
a different
Australian
bus?
girls. I
Yeah.
wish I was on the bus with those 2 girls.
All right. And how the hell he got back is even worse than how he got down there.
Yeah, they can't get him back.
Okay, you know they actually can't get him back. They just made up a story.
Right.
Okay, Ochoa, who was the assistant to the Secretary of the Interior, who was really in charge of the whole cover-up for the CIA in Mexico City, because they just blew off the Warren Commission guys when they went down there. All right, they they just got the cold shoulder. They weren't even allowed to interview Duran.
Right.
Okay, and so these guys ran whatever investigation there was, and so that's why they pasted together this story about him going down and him going back, which was I believe just completely manufactured.
I think it was completely
It's a kind of
manufactured.
fairy tale.
Yeah, I never. I mean, it's so amazing how many people buy into that in the
Yeah.
JFK research.
Oh,
community.
even in the Lopez report.
Yes,
The Lopez,
yes,
they
yes.
bought the story
Yes,
of him going
abs-
down there.
I recently reread it, to
Yeah.
look for that, and I was shocked that
Yes.
they did buy into
Yeah.
it. But Oswald is here doing things, trying
Yes.
to transfer his unemployment,
Yes.
going to the DMV,
Yes.
going to try to meet Connolly, who's out of town.
Right.
I mean, there's documentation of him in Texas
Yes.
at this time.
Employment Center.
The employment center is what I meant.
Yeah.
I said unemployment, but I think he was trying to transfer his New Orleans unemployment insurance.
Yes.
Am I right?
And he was also looking for a job.
He was also looking for a job at
Yeah,
the
that's
employment
what they
center.
call the TEC,
Right.
Texas Employment Commission.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, so Mexico City has become a very, very serious hole in the so-called official story, which unfortunately they covered up for so long, that almost nobody talks about it. It's very
Yeah, I
seldom
always
talked
bring it
about.
up. I mean, especially because of poor Sylvia Duran,
Yes.
who's ordered by us
Yeah.
to the Mexico City secret police
Right.
to be put on ice and
By the CIA, yeah.
by the
right.
CIA. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really an international war crime at that point. You know, just in terms of documentation of
Now let me tie this in with this. We actually had a section on Mexico City in the film.
aha.
Okay, but what I talked about here yesterday is that when we got thrown out of Oliver's office because of CV-19,
Wait a second. What is this now?
we got thrown out of Oliver's office
Why?
during the CV-19.
Oh, I'm sorry. COVID-19.
Yeah, the pandemic. Okay,
Right.
and
Sorry.
so I was not involved in the final editing of the film, so I really didn't have anything to say about that. And I talked about the things that I would have tried to get in the film. And one of them was, besides the section we had in Mexico. And by the way, we had Danny and we had Eddie and we had Lisa Pease talking about Mexico City.
Oh, and are there outtakes of that or?
Yeah, I don't know where they're at, but
Right.
yeah.
Oh,
but
wow. Okay, I'm
we
gonna ask
had
about that. I'll
All
ask
right, and so the other thing was Betsy Wolfe and the House Select Committee on the Oswald file. Betsy Wolfe was assigned to write a report on the CIA file on Oswald. All right, and so this woman, and nobody's ever heard of her.
I never even heard of her.
Okay, and be Malcolm Blunt, the brilliant English researcher, sent me this. Okay, the file on Betsy Wolfe. She asked for every division's charter in the CIA. Okay, and so they gave her all the charters, and she read through all of them. And then, from that information, she mapped out a graph of where the Oswald file should have gone, theoretically. All right. So then she actually gets the Oswald file, and it didn't go where it was supposed to go. Okay. And so then she started interviewing people. All right. And she interviewed about 4 or 5 people, and this culminated in, I believe, November of 1978 with her interview of Robert Gambino, who was the Office of Security chief at that time, which is where his file went to, was the Office of Security. All right. And so Gambino tells her, look, it doesn't matter how many papers are coming in or if they're pre-stamped. If you intervene at the first gate, which is the Office of Mail Logistics, and you arrange for the documents to go somewhere, that's where they will go. They will bypass whatever happened. So what this indicates, of course, as far back as when Oswald went to Russia, which I think is 1959, all right, somebody was rigging Oswald's file at the CIA because the Office of Security, they don't open 201 files, which is the most common file, in the CIA.
Right.
And there should have been a 201 file open by every law that she found out, every official rule or unofficial rule. There should have been a 201 file open on Oswald.
Well,
There was not.
even Hoover going to 59 reports that there are double
Yes.
Oswalds out of New Orleans,
Yes.
right, Jim?
Yeah, no. This was a report when they interviewed Marguerite.
Right.
She said that my son is supposed to be at a certain place now.
Well, she wrote to Hoover.
Yes. Yeah.
His mother, Oswald's mother, wrote a letter to J. Edgar Hoover about her son.
Right.
And
so, but this is so interesting because why would somebody want to keep Oswald's file away from everybody else, including where he's supposed to be, which is the SR division? His papers, she predicted. Well, see, what she did, and this shows you what this censorship does. See, John Newman's book in 1995, Oswald and the CIA,
great book.
has this in there.
Yeah, it's in there.
Well, if we would have had her reports back in 1979, we would have had them 16 years earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they delay for a reason.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a
okay.
reason, a madness that they're
Right,
a
and so
logic
this
to
is
what they're
very
doing.
important information about Mexico City, the Oswald file, and it was kept secret for about 17 years. So this is very, very interesting stuff that would have affected a real investigation, which of course there's never been
Right.
in the JFK case.
I'd
You
be
know,
afraid
why
rather-
was Oswald's file rigged in 1959? Why was someone impersonating
Why were they
him
impersonating him?
in Mexico City?
Or in New Orleans?
Okay.
In
Well, we
early on.
didn't get to that yet.
Right, we did.
All right.
There was a guy in Minsk who was his.
Tidovets?
I developed a relationship with him.
Okay. Nice book he wrote.
Right. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
And we emailed for
Oswald Russian episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So he sent me a signed copy of that and he talked about how he was his wingman. That they would go around, they went to the woman's dormitory, they picked up chicks and
They went to dances, yeah.
yeah, the two of them, you know, and
Yeah.
he was obviously KGB himself. I don't know if you saw early photos of him. He looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's so buff, and he's a medical doctor. I mean,
See,
interesting guy.
this is so strange about Oswald and the Soviet Union
Yes,
because
yes.
today it's so see-through, but the Warren Commission didn't print any of this stuff. It's very clear that because there had been a number of so-called defectors going into the Soviet Union with strange backgrounds, you know, like the Rand
Well, also
Corporation.
Eastern Europe, also the Soviet Union, but also
And that the KGB was on to something, you know, that we think that the Americans might be trying to send in under the guise of defectors, really undercover spies. All right, so when Oswald had that, you know, the Metropole Hotel, which is where Oswald was at, this was reserved by the Russians for, you know, incoming statesmen and diplomats, etc. So they put Oswald in this hotel, which was obviously wired and infrared camera and everything.
and Priscilla McMillan shows
And
up.
well, not just her, Eileen Mosby also.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
All right, and so they're listening to these interviews, and you know, Oswald was the most unprepared undercover spy ever.
He was a baby.
I mean,
Look how old he is.
he gets the year of the Rosenberg execution wrong. Okay, then he says he picked up a Rosenberg flyer in New Orleans.
Right.
You know, Rosenberg flyer in New Orleans. Okay, all right. And
Well, he was briefly in New York in high school.
Well, that's obvious. That's what I mean. He
Yeah,
screwed
yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. And so they obviously saw through him, and then he did this fake suicide attempt.
Talk about the fake suicide, because that's just
Okay,
so
he-
ridiculous.
He knows that his Russian escort's going to be coming up to his room.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
He's
He's also been
what's her
given-
name? Rima something.
Yeah, Rima.
All right,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And he knows she's coming up.
She's his tour guide.
And right, and so he puts himself in the bathtub, okay, and he writes a note, okay, like all is lost or something like
Right,
that.
right. Well, he's
Okay?
also given the 48-hour notice.
Right. Yeah, he
That's-
just got the notice.
He just
yeah.
got the notice that
All
he's
right?
got to leave the Soviet Union.
And so he goes ahead and he cuts himself across the wrist,
Right.
except when they examined it, they were very superficial
Yeah,
cuts.
yeah.
Okay, and so
He lays in the tub.
he lays in the tub, you know, with the blood coming out, etc.
Very dramatic.
Okay, yeah. I mean, this is like out of Chekhov, you know, and
Right.
so Rima comes in.
Well, they literally have to break the door
Yeah,
down.
right.
Yeah.
And she breaks it. She tells the guy the door's locked. Okay,
Right.
and so they go in and they break down the door, and we have this, you know, great El Greco scene.
Yeah.
You know, with Oswald, you know,
Laying
et
there
cetera.
in the-
Okay. So then they sent him in to this hospital.
To the nut house.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to say that. But
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's a wing.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's like a mental testing.
Right.
Okay. And so obviously, what happened during this phase is that the KGB figured for sure
Yeah.
this guy is some kind of a defector. And so what happens is that they send him to Minsk,
Mm-hmm.
400 miles away from Moscow. They give him probably one of the nicest apartments.
It's a great apartment.
Yeah, looking right over a river or a lake or
No,
something.
no, the river.
It was a,
yeah.
It was a river.
Yeah,
Okay.
river views.
Okay, and he's got these beautiful windows, etc. Okay, and then they proceed to set up a spy network.
Oh,
So instead of
yeah.
the spy trying to find out what's happening,
Right, they
the,
come
the
to him.
KGB
They come
now
to
puts
him.
a spy network around Oswald, and then they put. There's a great scene in Tidovets's book where they dig a electronic recorder out of the sink him and Oswald.
That whole apartment had
Yeah.
they had coaxial cameras that were ahead of their time in the walls, and they were watching them have sex. In the other apartment, and this is true. It's in his book also.
This is hysterical.
Hysterical.
Okay, you know, and so the guy who was supposed to be this super sleuth ends up being spied upon
By them.
Okay, by everybody. All right, and so Oswald figures out, you know, well, that was that. Okay, and so then he has to come back, you know, to the United States. All right, and anybody.
Well, let's not skip the honey trap of Marina Oswald coming with
Oh
him.
well, Tidovitz has in Tidovitz's book. I had never seen this before. He tries to draw a picture that Oswald was maneuvered into meeting Marina.
Right.
Like it was pre-planned.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And it's a very interesting scenario. I don't know if I buy it, but it's a very interesting scenario. That night at this dance that he's supposed to meet Marina with. Okay. And so talk about a quick, fast engagement. Okay, it was about a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, don't forget, he had the other girlfriend.
The other girl that broke his heart, right?
Who moved to Israel later on.
Okay.
And is still alive in Israel, by the way.
Well, she is?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
She didn't want a Jewish girl. She didn't want any part of him. She had nothing to do with anything. She said, "Look, you're not going to last very long." She literally says that as she dumps him. But then that's where the Marina thing comes in.
So then, you know, they have this incredibly fast romance and engagement. All right.
And pregnancy.
And what?
Pregnancy.
Oh, yes. Right. Okay. Now.
I like the sex parts. You seem to be skipping the sex parts.
So, what's so interesting, though, and what even the Warren Commission could not stumble over this. They talked to some of the White Russians in Dallas-Fort Worth, okay, and they even admitted. Now, obviously, that was another spy network around Oswald.
Right.
These White Russians.
To Morin Schilt and his friends.
Yeah, and his buddies.
Yeah.
And so, they say it's very strange for the Russians to let a married couple leave at the same time together. That's very unusual, okay? And in fact, I think one of the guys said he had never heard of it happening before. So you get this very odd, you know, was Marina a KGB asset or something like that,
Right.
you know, on Oswald, okay? And then they...
Well, just to interject, what had previously occurred on these situations was the honey trap person who came with us, and this later on happened with Clayton Lone Tree, the guard at the embassy. Years later, the same thing happened. You bring the bride back to the United States, you get into a tussle with them, they get divorced, and now they're free to roam and gather intelligence on their own.
Right.
And they did not want that to happen with Marina Oswald. And
Right.
there is violence, but it is usually provoked by the honey trap woman who wants to break free and do her intelligence operation. And I think that's what happened here with Ruth Bain.
So what happens is that once they return, okay, there begins to be a very, talk about a weird situation. Here you have this supposed Marxist, all right, whatever you want to call him. He used to call himself a Marxist-Leninist. Where does he live? He lives in the White Russian community in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which is where we're at today.
That's where we're at.
All right. And then in the summer of 1963, he starts associating with the Cuban exile community in New Orleans. So in other words, here he is with these White Russians whose goal is to overthrow the Soviet dictatorship and bring back the Tsar, okay? And these guys in New Orleans whose sole goal is to overthrow Castro and bring back somebody like Batista.
Right.
All right. So what the hell is a guy like this doing in these two vicinities? And if you read the Warren Commission, they never bat an eyelash
Yeah.
over any of this stuff. It doesn't seem unusual to
Just
them.
has some odd friends. I mean, he's a social climber.
You know, okay.
Well,
it
of
doesn't
course, the
seem odd to
relationship
them.
with DeMorenshield, this penniless
Well,
kid.
the
with
whole
his
thing
baron.
about DeMorenshield is, I mean, you could write a book about. There have been books written about this. Okay, is that what's so strange is that this guy who DeMorenshield introduced them to was a former Bruton was his name, Admiral Bruton.
Oh yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
This
Bruton.
guy is running Collins Radio.
Oh, that's right. That's
Okay.
right.
This
Yes,
guy-
I forgot about
Yeah,
Bruton.
He's
Yeah.
running Collins Radio.
Which is a spook radio.
And I'm going to get to that.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And this is one of the first people that DeMorenshield introduces them to. All right. Now, what makes this so unbelievably strange is that on the day of the assassination, you have reports that this Carl Mather guy was apparently in a car with Oswald. Okay.
Now, Carl Mather is an employee.
I'm gonna get to that.
Okay, just so we know. Go ahead. Yeah.
Now, he happens to work for Collins Radio.
That's right. That's right.
So you have these bookends, okay, of Bruton at Collins Radio with Mather at Collins Radio. And to top it off, I believe I'm right about this,
Mm-hmm.
Mather and his wife knew Tippett and his wife, and they go to her house
Right.
that day.
That's right. That's
Okay?
right. That is a weird, obscure
Okay,
fact.
all right.
Right.
Not over yet. The guy who she then married, okay, also worked at Collins Radio.
that Marina married.
Yeah,
Right.
that she married
Right.
later.
Everybody goes to Collins Radio. Now, the Collins Radio is.
Now this is just a coincidence, right?
Yeah, the whole Collins Radio angle has never been explored. I mean, that is a great side episode.
All right. So now, who's Collins Radio? Collins Radio had all these kinds of contracts,
Right.
recording, sound recording with the CIA, with the Pentagon, et cetera. It's very clearly part of the military-industrial complex,
Right.
and they got really big later on. Okay. So you just this is what you have in this case.
Well, don't forget, he's
Can
a
all
he's
these
a
things be a coincidence? Can all these?
How about the Cuban Missile Crisis? He's a Jagger
Yeah.
Childs mapping
Right.
out Cuba.
Yes.
You know?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So this was the strangest communist of all time. All right. 24 years old when he dies.
He's a baby.
Yeah.
He's a baby.
The most complex 24-year-old.
Now, did you ever hear that he went to a safe house in Rotterdam before?
Yes.
And he had the
I did hear.
diary.
In fact, some guy who
Thank
wrote
you.
a book.
Yeah.
About he actually had me write the introduction for it. Okay. And he said
Had the
that
diary taped to his chest.
he
Oswald.
believes that there was a stop in the Netherlands.
In Rotterdam, in a
Yeah,
house.
I think it
yeah.
was, and so he thinks that Oswald was debriefed.
Yes.
At that time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's
That was a
interesting.
very interesting story.
I
yeah.
know. I've never heard that again. I mean, it's in my script, by the way. I dramatized the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's where he gives him the diary that's taped to his stomach because they're checked on the train.
Yeah, that he talked about that.
Right, okay,
The whole
yeah.
train ride in, yeah.
The whole train ride in. And the diary is essentially human intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we needed back then because there's no satellite technology.
Right.
What he was doing was seeing how the trains run. How do you buy something in a department store? How much do you pay? When did the train?
But he was also doing a report on the radio factory.
That too.
that he was
And he
on.
also took some photos with his Minox camera of
Right.
their military.
Some very strange photos.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Well, it seems like everybody had a Minox camera back then. Because I recently saw newsreel footage from WFAU, which
Okay.
is up at Baylor, showing a parade in Dallas where Jack Ruby is with George Senator, and there's a jazz band on a flatbed truck with a beautiful black woman singing who worked in the carousel with this band. It was a house band. And there's no sound to this footage, recently released, literally 2 months ago. And in the footage is Jack Ruby with George Senator playing both of them with a Minox camera.
Oh my God.
In
That's
that,
interesting.
Yes, passing it back and forth, and George Senator's going like, "Look how it works," you know. And Ruby's got his hat off, and he's playing with his hair, you know, combing his limited hair back.
The cigarette box camera.
Right.
Okay, it was about this big, okay, and it was usually very expensive for that time, all right, and it was not easy to get the film developed either, you know, and so we could you already talked about that probably with when you talked about the pains.
Yeah.
Mark has one.
I have one myself.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah, but I'll also indicate that.
Well, this is 2022.
Exactly, but I found ads from Dallas, ads in the newspaper, full-page ads from Neiman Marcus selling the camera like it was
Really?
beautiful ads, beautiful sketched ads showing upscale people buying the camera, and it was $300.
Can you imagine Oswald in a Neiman Marcus store?
No, I can't, and he was obviously given the camera at a different point. But
I think they would have kicked him out.
it was for sale in Neiman Marcus.
Yeah. Okay.
Wow. What is the deal with Payne's husband?
Did you talk about the Minix camera caper?
Yes.
When Max was here?
Yes.
Yeah, he didn't put that in his movie.
I talked about it, and we had our own separate episodes on Ruth Payne. We did too. And
Okay.
I talked about it.
That is one of the most incriminating things.
Yep.
That you can say about Ruth and Michael Payne.
Yes.
The whole Minix camera caper.
Yes.
And these, of course, now.
Well, they're assigned to him now. I mean, Michael
Well, wait
Payne
a
is
second.
taking him to.
I was just going to say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
DeMorenschelt is obviously the guy who was. He later said this. He later said that, look, I would have never met Oswald.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the reason I met Oswald because J. Walton Moore asked me.
J. Walton Moore being the CIA
The station
chief in Dallas, Texas.
All right, that's why I met Lee Harvey Oswald. Why would I meet a guy like that? You know, and so what happens then, of course, is that after he traipses around with Marina and Lee, he then leaves for Haiti, okay? And he has a little gathering in which he invites Ruth and Michael Payne. And this is how DeMorenschelt passes off Marina and Lee to the Paynes. Then he goes to Haiti.
Well, don't forget the quid pro quo of going to Haiti with the oil.
I was just going to say
Oh,
that.
okay, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Somehow, some way, he gets something like $285,000 deposited. Now, that might not sound like a lot of money today, because here we are in 2022, but it would be the equivalent of about 2.8 million. Okay.
Yeah.
You know,
Huge
back
amount.
then.
Huge.
All right. You know, gasoline was 20 cents a gallon, cigarettes were 40 cents a pack, that kind of thing. You know, so then he goes to Haiti, and they are cleared, of course, before they go there. They visit military intelligence and the CIA, etc. Okay, and they're there for the assassination. All right, and so it seems to most people, you know, who try and look at this objectively, like this might have been a kind of pre-planned handoff, okay, from DeMorenschelt to Ruth and Michael Payne. Now, can we prove that? Probably not, okay, but it just looks that way circumstantially, all right?
Well, he testified for a long time before the Warren Commission, as did Ruth Payne.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Ruth, if you take a look
Who's
at
the
Ruth
longest?
and Michael Payne's testimony,
Yeah.
it's 6,000, it's over
Yeah.
6,000 questions.
She's number one, right? Or
And yeah, I think next to
length.
Marina Oswald.
oh, right. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
In total length.
All right, so
She's a meaningless character. I mean, she's just testifying
Right.
for days.
And there's all kinds of, you already done a show about it, so we don't have to go there. All right. Now, getting back to our film, you know, JFK Revisited and the book.
And the book, more importantly,
Okay.
the book. Skyhorse Publishing.
Okay. One of the things that, there were 3 keystones that I tried to make an archway with the script, in the pre-planning of the script, which I thought were very, very strong pieces of evidence that you could use in a courtroom. They were, number one, the secretary's on the 4th floor, which you had Barry Ernest. Did you have Barry Ernest on?
Not yet.
Oh,
No,
you haven't? Okay,
I
all
got
right.
to. This is the girl.
Barry Ernest wrote a book called The Girl on the Stairs.
Fairly recently.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's focused on Victoria Adams.
Yes.
But it also had parts of it about Sandra Stiles and Garner.
These are secretaries within the Texas School Book Depository
Right,
building.
on the 4th floor of the Texas School Book
just for people at home.
Depository.
Yeah.
So that was going to be one of my keystones. Another keystone was going to be John Stringer, and
John Stringer
his
being-
testimony as the autopsy photographer
Right.
with Doug Horn and Jeremy Gunn, where he looks at the pictures of Kennedy's brain and he walks over and he says, "This is Ansco. I didn't use Ansco. I used Kodak."
This is the film stock.
Right.
That
And then he
identified.
says, "You see these little numbers here at the bottom? This was a press pack. It's a series. I didn't do that." And so Jeremy Gunn asked him, "Well, are you ready to deny you took these pictures?" And he said, "If that's Ansco and that's a press pack, I didn't take these pictures."
Right.
Okay? All right? And so that was going to be my second keystone.
Well, this
Right.
is in the film.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Go.
All right.
Yeah. Go.
And then my third keystone, of course, was going to be CE 399 and the work that Gary Aguilar and Tink Thompson did with Bardwell Odom, the FBI agent. They tracked him down and they
399 being the magic bullet, and
Right.
Gary Aguilar being the ophthalmologist who was allowed to see the autopsy photos by
Right.
the family.
Now, and Tink Thompson's a private investigator, so he found Bardwell Odom because they wanted to find him because in the FBI documents there in the Warren Commission, it says that he showed the bullet to the two people who originally found it, Tomlinson and Wright, okay, at Parkland Hospital. And the problem that Gary had is,
This is the chain of custody portion.
Yeah, this is the
On
beginning.
the
This
magic
is the
bullet,
very
right? Just for
beginning,
people
yeah.
at home. Just
All
for
right.
people at home.
And so the problem Gary had is that, well, where's the report? Where's the 302 report of his interview with those two people? And so he goes down to the National Archives, says, "Give me every 302 report by Bardwell Odom." Okay, it's not there. All right, and so he tells Tink about this problem he's having. Goes, "Well, why don't we talk to Bardwell Odom?" And so Tink puts him into his, Go Finder machine. All right, and he finds out where Bardwell Odom is, and they go down, and Bardwell Odom says, "I never showed that bullet to anybody."
Wow.
He goes, "And if I would have showed that to O.P. Wright, I sure as hell would have remembered it because I knew O.P. Wright because he used to work for the sheriff's office. All right, and I would have be sure have written a report about that for CYA. Okay, I would have written a report. Believe me, I know the way Hoover was about this stuff. So no, I know. And so here you have a very serious problem. The provenance of CE 399. Was it the bullet? Okay, was it the bullet that was really
The
found
film
that day?
clearly blows up the chain of custody on 399,
Yes.
which is one of the best parts of the film.
Thank you.
It really is. It's just one of the great
All right.
parts.
So
of the film.
I decided those would be the three, and then we have that magic moment, which with Henry Lee, okay, which is that was
Henry Lee, the coroner.
no. Henry Lee is the leading
Criminalist.
crime reconstruction guy there is in the United States.
Did he invent
And-
blood splatter evidence, or?
He's the best that there is.
Okay.
Okay, and so he calls me up one day and says, "Jim," I go, "Yeah, Henry Lee." I go, "Great. Are you in LA?" He goes, "Yeah. Can you come down and go over some of the questions you're going to ask me?" And I go, "Sure." Now, if you live in LA and you understand the traffic situation and that I live in Burbank, you'll understand the humor in what I'm going to say next. And I go, "Where are you?" And he goes, "Malibu."
See you in a couple of
I
days.
go,
Three
you're going to
days
have to
later.
wait a couple of hours, okay?
Yeah.
Because there's only one way into Malibu. And this is a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock
Oh
that
my
you're
God.
calling me.
Oh my God.
Okay, so I eventually got down there. And one of the things I asked him, I said, "You were a captain back in Taiwan." And he goes, "Yeah, I did that for 5 years."
Wow, I didn't know.
And I go, "Well, then you supervised a lot of investigations." And he goes, "Yes." And I go, "Well, then why don't you talk about chain of custody?" And that little speech he gives in the movie, that's exactly the speech he gave me at Malibu, okay? And I said, "Cut. You're going to say that when Oliver asks you this question." It's really funny. Here you have this world-famous criminalist.
Was his wife there too?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay, and so there he is getting all made up and everything. Okay, and then he's sitting in a chair in front of Oliver, and he had his own TV show on True TV for 3 years. Famous Cases of Henry Lee.
Right.
He's
Oh,
published
yeah.
30 books. anytime there's a big case, you're going to try and get him in your case. And so here he is with all, and there his wife is running around with a little camera. She wants all these pictures of him being interviewed by Oliver Stone, for this movie. Okay,
So
I wish we could have used him more. There were a couple things that he said that I wish we could have gotten in the film. One was about the 90-degree angle. He says, here you have this bullet coming in on a right to left angle. But to exit, it has to reverse trajectory and start going left to right inside Kennedy's brain. All right, and so Oliver says, well, what kind of angle would that be? And he goes, 90 degrees. Okay. So, and then he said, the other thing he said that I wish would have got in the film was, I asked him about all this stuff about trajectory analysis, because ever since the ABC special in 2003, everybody who has a computer now tries to do a computer simulation of the John F. Kennedy assassination, okay?
They have it at the museum now, too.
So I asked him, I go, what do you think about doing something? He goes, what do you mean, a trajectory analysis? And I go, yeah. He goes, you can't do one in the Kennedy case. And I sat there for about a second. I said, I didn't think you were going to say that.
Wow.
And then this lawyer who was with them said, well, there's people who will tell you they can, but you can't. And he said, because neither wound in Kennedy was dissected. Therefore, you cannot do, it's just guesswork.
Yeah.
Okay? You're just guessing. You can't prove anything without the dissection. All right? And so I said, well, you know something? Now that you said that, we're not going to do it. And so what we did in the film is we concentrated on, could a bullet that did that emerge in the condition that it did? And we had Cyril Wecht and Joseph Dolce. One's a forensic pathologist, one was a battlefield surgeon. We had those two on that. And then the other thing we did, of course, was the chain of custody. And we had Gary Aguilar on that one, and we had Henry Lee, and we had Brian Edwards, talking about the whole chain of custody thing. On CE 399, you could have gone on for hours.
Yeah.
Because it's not just, it's also, was that bullet found on that stretcher? Okay? Was that the right stretcher? Because if you read the Warren Commission testimony, Spector does everything he can to try and get Tomlinson to change his story about the stretcher.
Tomlinson is the one who finds.
So he's the first guy
399.
who found it. Yeah. Then he gave it to O.P. Wright.
Right.
Then the other thing, of course, is the interview with what Wallace Milam did with Wright's widow, who eventually became chief of nursing at Parkland. And in 1993, he interviewed her, and she said, "Oh, we were finding all kinds of bullets that day."
That's right.
And so he goes, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, well, that wasn't the only bullet we found."
Right.
That we found. So I think one implication of that is, come hell or high water, they were going to get a bullet found on some
I think
gurney.
FBI agent Barrett with Buddy Walters finds one in the grass.
Yeah, right. He found a bullet also.
And
yeah.
he took that to D.C.
Right.
on a jet plane.
Yeah.
Wow.
So here you have, if again, like I said earlier, if you had the real rules of evidence, okay, that you have evidence and testimony, the Warren Commission story wouldn't even get off the ground, okay, and so those are three of the things that we tried to. Another thing we tried to do was Berkeley. We tried to. I think Doug Horn did a good job.
The Berkeley was great
about George Berkeley,
because he almost comes clean, doesn't he?
Right. There's 2 or 3 times.
Wow,
where
yeah.
it's almost like he wants
This
to
is
talk.
Admiral Berkeley, the private physician of JFK, who signs the death certificate.
Right, and as we have Don Miller talking about Dr. Don Miller.
He also stays with LBJ through his
Right.
Right. Leaves the last day.
That's in the long version.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Don Miller, who knew Berkeley's son, says, look, if Berkeley would have testified, he would have had to explain that death certificate.
Yeah.
Because a death certificate puts the wound in the back at T3, which is too low, all right? And also, which they don't show in the Warren Commission volumes, he signed the autopsy face sheet, which also puts the wound in the back too low. All right, so that's probably, and here, you can believe it, there was no cross-examination of Berkeley.
And he's also putting himself in legal jeopardy by doing that.
Yes, if he would have testified.
If he would have testified.
All right, so there's a couple of times, maybe 3 times, that Berkeley intimated that he had other, like for example, I think this is 64, he testifies for the Kennedy Library in a private interview, and the guy asks him, well, what do you think of this whole 3-bullet thing? And he says words to the effect, I'd rather not comment on that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good
Why
move.
would he rather not comment on it?
Yeah, what's it to him?
All right. And so that was another thing that I tried to concentrate on, was the whole story about Berkeley. We also tried to put in some information about the rifle, okay, because I think that has for too long been too ignored. Okay, so we tried to raise some questions about, did Oswald really order that rifle? Because it's not the one that the Warren Commission says he ordered.
Or that's in the Smithsonian today.
Yes, and so that's another thing that we tried to question for I think probably the first time, and then we tried to get into the whole thing about the small particles in the front of the skull versus the large particles in the back of the skull, which would suggest a shot from the front. And I believe that this is the first time that's ever been on a major broadcast media. So so that was something that I believed. I really appreciated the fact that Oliver was really willing to go that far in something like this. The only disagreement that we had about what I wanted to put in versus what finally got in. The one time that we had a disagreement was I wanted to put in the 6.5 millimeter fragment, okay, in case your listeners don't know what this is.
Right.
When the Ramsey-Clark panel convened in 1968,
this was the Attorney General under LBJ
yes,
who convened
he put
the Clark
together
panel.
a medical panel,
Right.
and for the first time on the x-rays, they said that we see this 6.5 millimeter fragment in the back of the skull. Now, why is that important? First of all, it's clear as day if you look at the x-ray, but none of the autopsy doctors
Mention it.
and neither of the FBI agents the night at the morgue said they saw it. They didn't see it. It's very hard to miss.
This is Silbert and O'Neill.
Siebert and O'Neill and the 3 autopsy doctors, Fink,
in
Boswell,
Bethesda, yeah.
and Humes.
Yeah.
How could they not see it? They examined
It looks clear in the
X-rays.
film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the other problem is that it just 6.5 millimeters just happens to match the Western Cartridge Company bullets for that particular rifle. So here you had
Smoking gun.
prima facie evidence
Yeah.
that this rifle fired this bullet in the Kennedys, and nobody saw it the night of the autopsy. So the Ramsey-Clark panel. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to put that forth, and I wanted to label that section as the second magic bullet. Because if you believe this story that the Warren Commission is trying to sell you, this projectile that hits Kennedy in the back of the skull goes through his head, comes out the right side of his temple near above the right ear, above and to the right of the right ear. It blasts forward into the front of the car, and the head of the bullet and the base of the bullet land in the front seat. Now here's the problem the 6.5 millimeter created. All right, that has to be from the middle of the bullet. If you got the head of the bullet and the base of the bullet over here, so how on earth did this bullet break into 3 parts?
Right.
And somehow the base of the bullet elevated itself or de-elevated itself and went around the middle of the bullet and traveled forward right out the tail of the front of the bullet and landed in the front
At
seat.
Kellerman's feet.
And so I had this all planned out, how I wanted the animation and everything. and labeling it the second magic bullet. Everybody knows about the first magic bullet.
Right.
But how many of you people know about the second magic bullet?
Now,
and here's
now-
my question.
yeah.
How the hell can you have 2 magic bullets in 6 seconds in the same murder case?
That's ridiculous.
Okay.
That's ridiculous. Let me ask you something about the Connolly shooting, because with trajectory, same thing you're talking about. Nobody ever gets into the fact that when you get rid of the magic bullet, take it off the table and say it's crazy crap, who and what shoots Connolly?
Well,
Jim?
it all depends on how many bullets you think.
No.
were fired.
Forget about. Just think about Connolly sitting there like
Yeah.
this, and a bullet comes almost at a 45-degree angle, 5 inches above, right here, below his shoulder
Yeah.
line, comes out 13 inches below in the front, in an angle about 45 degrees, almost straight down into the thigh. Where is that shot from? In your humble opinion?
In my-
Nobody ever discusses this. I've been obsessed with this for a long time, Jim, and I need
Okay,
something.
so the trajectory of that.
It's 45 to 50 degrees.
No, I'm talking about right to left.
Okay.
Okay, so that would have to be this.
It goes across.
This way.
It goes across here.
Okay.
Right.
And then, but it has to be a second bullet to hit his thigh.
No.
What do you mean?
It's one bullet.
Are you trying to be funny?
No, I'm not being funny at all. It's a bullet that goes in here, comes out 13 inches, goes
But
through
what about this?
Go ahead.
Well, you're supposed to believe that it smashed his wrist.
Right.
Okay, which is, as Syl Reck likes to say, is one of the hardest
Right,
bones
right.
in the body.
Yeah.
All right, and then somehow it goes this way. All right, unless you're Dale Myers and you believe his hand was over here, but I don't believe his hand was over. He's still carrying his Stetson hat
Right.
there. Okay, and then it has to be more than one bullet.
So you're saying he's hit by 2 bullets?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's an interesting answer.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
how many bullets do you think were fired?
Oh, that I don't know. That's a good question. That is a very good question.
I would say at least 5 or 6.
Yeah, I was always thinking 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't. Oh, okay. So do we have enough material on Jim, or
Well, I don't know.
how much more time do you have there?
We have 95 minutes on him.
Okay, that's a huge chunk.
You have 95 minutes already?
We were going to do 5 minutes, Jim. What is all this about? I didn't know you knew all this stuff.
Okay, so I'm going to have to raise my rate then.
Oh, no, don't do it. It's not a minute by minute. Give him an extra.
Another token.
Give him one extra.
Oh
pin.
my God!
We very rarely give the 4-pin
Okay.
payment.
Hey, I'm going to Morton's.
You go to Morton's with those pins.